Hey everybody, Austin here again, doing my third Patreon Q&A session. These are actually some leftovers from session number 2. I was actually given quite a few questions there, and I just knew I wasn't going to be able to get all of them done in a single video. It would have turned out to it would have been like a 3-hour long video, so what we're going to do is we're going to take the rest of those and do session number 3. So I want to thank Sharner Smith and Andrew McNeil. These questions came from them. Those are the folks that actually gave me the most questions when I was fishing for questions a few months back, so thank you guys for that. Just a heads up to Patreon backers, I also have a Discord set up now, and I think what I'm going to do is on that Discord server have a section there for Q&A requests. So if you guys ever have any questions or anything like that, I mean, you can always post them on my Patreon videos themselves. But you can also go to the Discord server, drop a question in there, and what I'll do is I'll just sort of like keep a spreadsheet or a document with all the questions and whatnot. So if you guys want to keep sending me those questions, I'll be happy to continue doing these Q&A sessions. So, but yeah, with that, let's go ahead and start off with the first question. So the first question is, in your opinion, do you think is there a console or game developer that is overrated? I don't really think so. I mean, I don't really think, you know, going around thinking, oh, that's overrated, that's, it shouldn't be popular or something like that. I don't think it's really a kind of like a healthy mindset. I think when I was younger, I probably thought, I think there was a stretch of time where I thought Nintendo was overrated. But I'm not 15 anymore, you know, I don't have like a personal vendetta against Nintendo. I've played pretty much consoles and games from every major publisher that's out there, or console manufacturer, or something like that. I mean, the guys that are really popular, they're really popular for a reason. They make really high quality content. You know, say Nintendo, for instance, their consoles, you know, for the most part have been very, you know, high quality. They're built well, they work well, you know, etc., etc. So, yeah, I don't really think there's a you know, console or game developer that's overrated. I mean, there are developers I don't care for that much, mainly just because of some business practices, you know, like, you know, EA, for instance. Not the biggest fan of EA these days, anyways. The old EA I like a lot, but the current EA, not a huge fan of them. But they make good games that people apparently like, and I mean, I can't really complain about that. So if people are enjoying the content companies like that are putting out, then you know, I think that's really all that matters. So yeah, I don't think anything's really overrated. I do have preferences, but you know, I'm not gonna say one company or another is overrated per se. Alright, next question is, do you think that the current gaming model is sustainable? This is a good one. Online-only games, rushed games with patches later, DLC, season passes, gold editions, loot boxes, etc. I think it's perfectly sustainable. I mean, the examples there are actually kind of like some of the negatives to modern-day gaming, and some of these have been around for ages. So like, you know, patches later, gold editions, things like that, re-releases and whatnot. That's something that's been going all the way back to PC gaming, like from the 90s. You know, games, especially computer games, you know, have never been perfect. And back in the day, you know, patches would be released online. I mean, hell, Doom is a great example. There were like 7 or 8 different like revisions of that game. Like within the first year it came out, patches were made available to people, and a lot of people that aren't like into the community end of things with something like Doom, they don't see that. And this stuff has been going back a really, really long way. It's not really anything new to gaming. What is sort of new is it being applied to console gaming, and I think that's throwing a lot of console gamers for a loop. But if you've been a PC gamer for any amount of time, you know that a lot of this stuff has been standard for a very long time. Gold editions in particular, they go way, way back. I mean, there's a gold edition of probably any really popular PC game. For one, it's a way to repackage the game, you know, for like a retail setting or something, with all the fixes and whatnot. Plus, you might be able to add some extra content and things like that. Maybe it's got an expansion pack built in or something like that. You know, Painkiller is a great example. It had the black edition, you know, instead of gold edition, it was the black edition, and it had the expansion pack, and it had the latest patches and all that stuff. Now, as far as things like rushed games with patches later, I'm not the biggest fan of that with modern console gaming in particular. You know, with PC gaming, it's kind of been there for a long time, but with console gaming, it is a little irritating. One thing that really bugs me now with modern console games is I get the game home. I like to buy my games physically, so either I order them from Amazon, or I go pick them up at Walmart or eStarland locally, maybe Best Buy, and I get home, I pop the disc in, and it's got to install it. That's fine. I totally understand that. But then it's got to download a huge patch, not just like, you know, a couple hundred megabytes, you know, for like a small fix or something. It's like you got to download like half the game. It's ridiculous, and I'm not a big fan of that. I'm not a big fan of that at all. I wish that the games, console games specifically, would be released in a perfectly working state. I mean, sure, maybe there are bugs or things like that that can be patched out later, but I want a fully functioning game on my disc when I get it. I don't want to have to download patches right away or things like that. For archival purposes, you know, I want these discs to work in the future. You know, none of us really knows what's going to happen with, you know, the servers or things like that, how long these companies are going to allow us to access this content. You know, say when there's an Xbox 36 or a PlayStation 58 or whatever, you know, will I be able to still play my old Xbox One game, you know, by having the physical disc? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Microsoft's been doing pretty well with that lately with like 360 backwards compatibility and things like that, allowing you to play your old games on current gen hardware, but who knows how long they're going to keep with that, you know, and companies are going to keep with that. So, but I mean, you know, the question, to go back to the question, is do you think the current model is sustainable? And I don't really think I don't think there's going to be an issue, really. I mean, it is sustainable as long as they keep the servers up and whatnot. This model, I guess, is fine, but it's not my preferred way of doing things, that's for sure. It's definitely working now. Companies are making money hand over fists. You know, the industry is really healthy right now. And you know, while only some like the negatives were mentioned here, as far as like the current gaming model, there are a lot of positives too. I mean, convenience is a huge thing. You don't have to go to the store to buy a game anymore. You can buy the digital version or whatever, and you can have it just like that. You know, when midnight hits, you know, on launch day or whatever, you can download it to your system and play it right away. You got all your games, you know, loaded onto your console. You don't have to swap discs anymore. You don't have to get up. Things are a lot, you know, faster and snappier in that regard. You've got sales and things like that. You know, I really love the summer sales, especially on Steam, and the winter sales. Even the Xbox, though, it had, you know, pretty decent sale for QuakeCon. I ended up picking up another copy of Doom for like $15 or whatever. And, you know, even though I've already got a physical copy, it's the whole convenience thing. It's a really nice positive aspect to modern gaming. And, yeah, it's cool. Yeah, I mean, again, I do prefer my games being functional. When I buy the disc, I want to be able to put the game in, install it, have it work. Plus, I also have, you know, peace of mind that if something happens down the road, this disc will still work. You know, even if, say, you know, the Xbox Live servers go offline and you can't access the patches. There are some really bad examples, though, or I should say, really good examples of things that shouldn't be done in the modern industry. And one of them was like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 or whatever, that came out a year or two ago. And the disc was basically a coaster. You pop the disc in, you know, only a teensy tiny portion of the data was on it. You couldn't really play the game at all from the data that was on the disc. You had to download almost the entire game. Stuff like that is pretty ridiculous to me. I mean, if you're going to do that, then why even bother releasing a physical version of the game? There is no point. All you're doing is just you're kind of throwing away money, actually, you know, as a publisher by doing that. I mean, it's just, why spend the time making the piece of plastic and, you know, getting the box art printed up and packaged and shipped out to retailers? Why even bother going through that if it's just going to be a key, basically? That's all it is. So you pop the disc in, it's a key, and then you download everything else. So I'm not a fan of that at all, and I definitely want my games to work. I want my games to work from the disc If I have to download patches later, cool. Okay, great. But at least I've got the full game there, ready to go on the disc. That's one of the reasons to have a disc, you know, so. But yeah, that's sort of my answer to that. If you guys ever have any other questions or comments on things like that, or if you guys have any, if you have some choice words about the current gaming model, definitely post them down in the comment section below. So this question I think has been asked before, but I'm going to go ahead and answer it again. What's your personal favorite console of all time and why? I don't really have a single personal favorite console. I've had so many different consoles over the years, dozens, you know, at a bare minimum of unique game consoles. I can't really pick a single one, but I do have favorites. You know, I absolutely love going back to the old Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES. It's just, I mean, it was my first real game console that I could call my own. Yeah, my parents had an Atari 2600. I absolutely loved it, you know, right when I was born. But the Nintendo Entertainment System was bought for me. You know, it was my game console, and you know, I got it when I was 5 or 6 years old or something like that. And I absolutely loved that thing growing up, and I still love it. I love going back to it. The games, you know, still resonate with me. You know, stuff like your Ninja Gaidens and Castlevanias, Double Dragon, Mega Man, Mario, Zelda, all that stuff. Really, really great stuff. I still love going back to. I like that the games aren't ridiculously long. I mean, it depends on the game, obviously, but you know, if I avoid the RPGs and whatnot, you know, a lot of games can be finished in less than an hour, but they're fun. They're also difficult. They basically kind of like get my brain juices flowing because they're engaging for me because, you know, they can be difficult. I like, you know, my love for like more challenging and difficult games kind of stemmed from the NES. If I didn't have the NES growing up, maybe I wouldn't be as big of a fan now of challenging games. But I was basically raised with challenge, and that's what I look for in games. So yeah, NES is way up there for me. Other systems I love, you know, I love the Super Nintendo. I think for obvious reasons. You know, if you have a Super Nintendo or have played it, you know the quality of the library. It's just got a really, really good library. Its top tier games are just super top tier, just really, really great stuff. You know, I really love Super Mario World, all the games, you know, like that and whatnot. Super Metroid, Super Castlevania 4, Mega Man X, Sega Genesis and Sega CD in particular. Really, really love those as well. Sega Saturn, Sony PlayStation, the original PlayStation. There's just so many great consoles out there, but those would probably be some of my actual all-time favorites. The Saturn in particular I really like for the sort of like 32-bit era arcade style games, you know, from the polygonal Sega arcade titles, like, you know, stuff that's kind of like Die Hard Arcade and whatnot, to the, you know, the 2D imports and shmups in particular. So, you know, you've got like the start of the bullet hell shoot 'em up genre. You got Radiant Silvergun, and stuff like that. Just really, really love the Saturn for stuff like that. Sony PlayStation, you know, is that early era of 3D I kind of have a soft spot for, but it's also got a lot of great imports as well. Lots of great shoot 'em ups, which is one of my favorite genres, and it's got some of the, you know, old school style first-person shooters that I really like Doom and things like that. So, but yeah, I mean, those are some of my all-time favorites, absolutely. And I would say that the NES was probably my first all-time favorite because, you know, when I first got the NES, I had only really experienced the Atari 2600, maybe a little bit of Master System at a friend's house. So obviously the NES was a favorite for a long time. But, you know, nowadays it's definitely NES, Super Nintendo, Genesis, Sega CD, PlayStation, Saturn. Should probably toss Dreamcast in there as well, but I don't play it as much these days. That'll change because I have a GDEMU now, so, and we'll do some Dreamcast streams and whatnot. So, all right. Next question is, what do you think is one of the most important gaming IPs? I'd say the most important gaming IPs to me are the ones that just made a really, really big impact. And this goes all the way back to the, like, kind of like the beginning of the industry in a way. So, you know, like Pong is, you know, a seminal title, really. It's really what, you know, set the industry in motion, you know, the arcade industry in particular. And then that, you know, that sort of trickled over into, you know, the console space, the home market and whatnot. You had, well, Pong clones and things like that. Then you eventually had dedicated video game consoles, you know, like the Odyssey. And then you had, eventually the Atari VCS, and there you go, the start of the industries. It's really that was definitely very, very important. But then anything else that was really popular, so like continuing with that era, you had stuff like Space Invaders was a huge deal back then. Your games like Asteroids, Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, stuff like that, extremely important stuff. Some of those are still going today, those are all familiar names. And it's, it's kind of like the same thing for the rest of time, basically. So anything that was really important that got people and kept people interested in video games. Super Mario Brothers, Legend of Zelda, Doom, Final Fantasy, Resident Evil, stuff like that. And you continue to have brand new gaming IPs that are probably going to be as important as some of those. Minecraft is a huge one these days, and it's just stuff that really affects people's lives. I think those are probably the most important gaming IPs, without a doubt. So, next question is, how much longer do you think GameStop can hang on? These are some depressing questions, man. I have no idea. I'm not really an industry analyst or anything like that. I did actually check their current stock price before answering this question. I think it's at like $15 a share right now, which isn't absolutely horrible, but it's not where they used to be. It looks like at their peak it was something like $60, $70, $80 a share. Probably about 10 years ago. And so where they're at right now, they're not doing well compared to what they've been at in the past. And their current value at the moment seems to be about in line with where they were at in like 2003-ish. So not great, but they're still hanging on. And there are a few articles I stumbled upon that basically said that they're basically predicting that GameStop might even get out of video games in order to just sort of stay afloat. I don't know. I don't know if it's that bad for them. I mean, we still have a few GameStops in my area. They seem to be doing well enough, although I don't stop into GameStop very often. Haven't been a fan of the company for a long time now. I used to actually work for them. I used to work for GameStop. I worked for FuncoLand and an electronics boutique before they were even known as GameStop. Back then, Electronics Boutique was a separate company, and FuncoLand was basically GameStop. And then eventually they merged together. The two separate companies merged together and formed, basically they formed GameStop. I mean, it's confusing, but basically EB and FuncoLand were two separate companies. GameStop was on like the FuncoLand side, and then either EB was bought or a deal was made and they merged, and then the GameStop brand was just everything. But I did actually stop into a GameStop a few months back just with a friend. We were out grabbing lunch or something, and he was like, "Hey, let's head on over to GameStop since it's right across the street." And it was the first time I had been in a GameStop in a couple years, and I was really surprised at how few video games they actually had there. The gaming section was basically condensed into just a couple of shelves. All the games were just smashed together, like they were on a bookshelf or something. And it was just a lot of t-shirts, a lot of like fan stuff, a lot of like cups and mugs and stuff like that. It was a lot of Think Geek stuff, because I guess GameStop bought Think Geek or whatever. So I was actually really surprised at how few video games they had, and how little they actually focused on the games themselves. You can still buy them, you can still buy new releases and stuff like that, but they weren't prominently featured like they had been in the past. In the past, you'd walk into a GameStop and it was just games, accessories, consoles. You wouldn't have t-shirts, you wouldn't have cups and mugs and stuff like that. It was just all games, and that has completely changed. So yeah, I don't know if their current model is sustainable, if people are really into it. Do any of you guys actually like going into GameStop? Do you still shop at GameStop? I kind of want to know what you have to say about it, because I'm not the most experienced with them from a modern day current perspective. But, again, I did run across some articles where people are basically, saying, hey, they should probably just get out of video games entirely, or they should change their direction. Like one article I'm looking at right now says, GameStop could be better if they just stop selling games and focus on the gaming community itself, you know, selling trinkets and stuff like that, like they kind of already are. I don't know. So, I don't know if that really answered your question, or if it was a good answer, but we'll just roll with it. So, alright, next question is, what has the perfect soundtrack? So this question, I guess, could be taken a few different ways. It could be what soundtrack fits the game really, really well, in my eyes, or what is my favorite soundtrack. We're gonna go with the, you know, the first one, which is, I think the best soundtracks in games are the ones that just, you don't even think about them while you're playing. Like, when I hear a bad soundtrack, like, in a game where it just doesn't fit, like, it sticks out like a sore thumb to me. I think the best gaming soundtracks are the ones that just really fit the game very, very well. So, the Super Mario Brothers series, I think, is amazing for this. Like, I don't listen to any of the music outside of the games, but the soundtracks fit those games perfectly to a T. Like, every note, every tune, every whatever just is supposed to be there. Like, it feels right and it feels natural. Going all the way back to the very first Super Mario Brothers, I mean, every single tune in that game is just perfect, I think, for that game. I don't go and listen, I don't fire up MP3s of the Super Mario Brothers music, but when I play the games, I can't imagine those games without that music. And I'm sure a lot of you guys, you know, probably understand exactly what I'm talking about. Same goes for, you know, like Super Mario 2, 3, Mario World, you know, stuff like that. It's just really great stuff that fits the game perfectly. And I think those are the perfect soundtracks, if you will. So next question is, which game do you have the most contrarian opinion of? So, a game that's universally loved that you hate, or one that you love but is considered terrible by most people. I'll try to answer both of these, actually. So, I'm not a big fan of survival horror games. And while I don't hate the genre, I don't really hate any genre, to be honest with you. I have genres I like, and I have genres that I know I can't really get into, or I haven't really tried getting into them because they just don't either click with me, or I don't think they're that much fun. Flight sims are another one. I don't really get into flight sims at all. Survival horror games, not a big fan of them. I feel like they're way too slow. And there are some exceptions. I actually really love Resident Evil 4. It was a faster paced game. You know, you weren't really starved for ammo and stuff like that. Enemies would drop ammo, and it had some really fun side gameplay modes as well, like the Mercenaries mode. My brother and I were actually reminiscing about that just the other night, so that was pretty cool. But yeah, not a big fan of survival horror, so, you know, a game I have a contrarian opinion of, you know, it's like, some of the Resident Evil games, the early ones in particular, they're just really slow and clunky to me. But they have a huge fan base. You know, they're very popular games, and, you know, I can see why they're popular, but they're not really for me. There's some older survival horror games I do enjoy, though, like the original Alone in the Dark. Alone in the Dark is one of those games I definitely want to do a Let's Play on. Every time I try to fire it up, I get about 3/4 of the way in, and then I get lost, and I have to look up a walkthrough again and practice it. But yeah, I still really like that, but for the most part, the genre doesn't really do it much for me. So, a game I love, but it's considered terrible by most people. You know, I've mentioned this one a lot on my channel, but Super R-Type on Super Nintendo, I really, really love that game. It's one of my favorite shoot-'em-ups of all time, and a lot of people hate that game. I don't understand it at all, actually. I don't really understand why people don't like it. I think it looks great. I think it sounds great. I think it plays really well. It's got some stuff that really puts people off, like the bad checkpoint system. There are no checkpoints. So you die, you go all the way back to the beginning of the stage, even if you got to a boss. And that's really frustrating for people. Doesn't really bother me because I know the level's like the back of my hand. And it's one of those games where I think when you put the time in and you get good at it, it's really, really satisfying. But a lot of people, I guess, don't want to do that. Yeah, so that's a game I love that, you know, that's considered terrible by most people. Another one is Scorcher on the Sega Saturn. Did a Let's Play of that a few months back. It's one of my favorite racing games of all time. but admittedly, it's extremely challenging, which really puts a lot of people off. It's got a high learning curve, so it's going to take people a while to get into and figure out, and that's going to be a frustrating process for a lot of people. And on the Saturn in particular, there is a PC version which runs perfectly, but if you play the Saturn version, it's got a sluggish frame rate at times, especially on the final track in the game. It gets really, really slow, and that can be off-putting for people as well. And it's also, the Saturn version also is kind of glitchy. I don't remember about the PC version, but the Saturn version, you can just get stuck on the track, and it's weird. But a lot of times that doesn't happen, and when it does happen, I just sort of like shrug it off, because the rest of the game to me is just so much fun. It's got an amazing, sort of like psytrance style soundtrack, and it's just really awesome for me. It's very unique as well. So that's a game I love that, I've seen a lot of reviews on it and people just do not like it. But yeah, hopefully that answered the question there. All right, so we got 2 more questions. So these are actually kind of fun questions. You have a single-use time machine. It's programmed to take you to any video game store at any time in history, and you can return with 3 games that you found there. Where and when would you go, and what games would you take back? So I actually was thinking, I was like, man, this is going to be a hard question, but then like I thought about it, and I was like, oh, actually no, this is actually pretty easy. I would go back to the late 90s, probably 1997 or 1998, and I would visit one of the I'd visit one of the locations of Starland before they went, basically internet only. Well, they're not internet only technically now. They do have one location in Northern Virginia that you can still shop at in person, but their main business is the online store. So before they started focusing on that, they actually had 3 locations in the Northern Virginia and DC, Maryland area. And one of them was right up the street from me in Centerville, Virginia. The other was in Burke, Virginia, which was a little bit farther out, but I could still go down there pretty easily. What I would do is I would go up there to the Centerville store in particular. When I was in high school and I didn't have my driver's license yet, my mom would go get her fingernails done at, she'd go to a nail salon basically, and it was right across the street from Starland in Centerville. The Centerville store was a really small shop, but it was just packed to the ceiling, with games. It was great. So what she would do is, I think it was every Thursday, every 2 weeks. It was on Thursday every 2 weeks. She would go to the nail salon or whatever, and she would take me with her, and she'd drop me off at Starland, and then she'd go get her nails done, and then a couple hours later she'd come back and pick me up, and we'd go home. And I got a lot of great games at Starland there back then. I'd walk out with a game or two, every other week, and it was fantastic. And so the 3 games I would take back, they'd be games that I actually picked up back then, that I no longer have. I don't really have anything from my collection back then. But one of them is Musha. So I remember snagging a copy of Musha there for about $15. It was complete, minty, it was fantastic. It was when I first discovered the game via emulation. Now that game's like $200 or $300 complete, maybe more now. So I would take that back. For one, it's a personal favorite on Genesis, but 2, it's also really expensive these days. And the rest of the games I'm going to list are basically along the same lines. They're really expensive now, they're hard to get, and they're also personal favorites. So another one would be, this would have to be 98, because I don't, this came out in 98. It was Radiant Silvergun for the Saturn. So I'd go back there and I'd buy that. Granted, they would probably charge $80 for it, but $80 is way better than $200 that it sells for today or whatever. It's either $150, maybe you can get one for $150 on auction if you're lucky, but it seems like it's about $200 on average these days. And it's my favorite shoot 'em up of all time. It's one of my favorite games of all time, up there with stuff like Doom and Castlevania and things like that. Radiant Silvergun is really, really fantastic. And the third game I'd pick up and bring back, this is kind of hard, actually. I'm not sure. I would probably either spring for another Saturn import of similar value. Maybe I'd grab like Battle Gorega or something like that. Although it's not really a personal favorite of mine. You know, I've been playing the game, the Xbox One version of it recently, since they brought it out to Xbox One and PS4. Maybe I'd grab that just because it's, you know, it's valuable now. Maybe I'd grab Earthbound because it's valuable, but I've never really gotten into the Earthbound, so, like, would I really want that just because it's expensive? I don't know. Probably not. Maybe I'd take back, you know, one of the Castlevania games, like Rondo of Blood for the Turbo Duo, or a nice minty complete copy of Super Castlevania 4 or something like that. Yeah, I could see myself doing that. I'd love to have another minty Super Castlevania 4 complete. I had to get rid of my Castlevania collection a few years ago because of money issues, and you know, I miss it. You know, I've had near complete Castlevania collections multiple times over the course of my life because it's my favorite, you know, gaming franchise. I tell people Doom is my favorite video game, but Castlevania is my favorite video game franchise. Like, Doom doesn't have that many games in it. It's got a handful of, you know, main games and follow-ups, while Castlevania's just got, you know, dozens and dozens of different games. Yeah, I would probably snag a nice, you know, complete Super Castlevania 4 or something like that. Yeah, I can see myself doing that. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. It's a fun one to think about, actually, because it takes me back. I really loved just hanging out in the Starland store. Like, I've got Starland up the street still, you know, East Starland now, and they have a showroom in Chantilly, Virginia. But it's not quite the same as it used to be. You know, a lot of the stuff is just, you don't see a lot of the same stuff anymore that you saw back in the 90s. Like seeing Musha complete was a common thing back then. Now it's not. You know, you never see Musha pop up, and when it is, it's in their case of expensive games, and you know it's expensive, and it's, you know, what's special about it. But back then it was like, man, I found this awesome game. It was cheap and it's great. It's one of the best games I played on Genesis. You know, like, it was a different vibe. It was a different feeling back then, and I do kind of miss that, and it's fun to think about. So, all right. So next question is, this is actually the last question, so this is actually a fun one as well. After a long night of Battletoads and heavy drinking, I can actually relate to that one recently, you decide to break into an abandoned Blockbuster store. While exploring the empty stockroom, you find what looks like a Nintendo World Championship cartridge under some cardboard boxes. In disbelief, you begin to rub the dust off the label when you're suddenly enveloped in thick smoke. And from out of the mist appears the fabled Videogame Genie. He grants you a single wish. You can reach back through time and rescue a single cancelled or unreleased game from the development abyss. The world will be as if it had been finished and released at the time, giving you memories of playing it then, or allowing you to find a copy today to experience for the first time. Which game do you choose? So basically, which game would be brought back from the dead? There are a lot of games out there that were canceled that I really wish weren't canceled. I'd actually probably pick. I'm gonna actually sort of cheat here in a couple of ways. And I'm gonna name a few games actually. So as far as a game that was actually canceled that I really wish was finished, was Castlevania The Bloodletting for 32X. And only a few screenshots, I believe, exist for this game, but it was a Castlevania game being worked on for the Sega 32X. Who knows how far they got into development? It might not have been much, if at all, but what I have seen of it, it looks really good. Like, it's very colorful, you know. Castlevania Bloodlines on Genesis is amazing. It's a great game, but it's still limited by the limited Genesis hardware, and the 32X would have made for a more colorful game. The screenshots I've seen definitely look a lot more colorful than any stock Genesis game. It's one of the advantages of the 32X is having that high color count. And yeah, I would have loved to have seen that, you know. For one, it would have been probably a good Castlevania game. Two, it would have been a good 32X game, most likely. And you know there aren't a whole lot of great 32X games. I like the 32X a lot, but, you know, it's pretty easy to see that it doesn't have a ton of, like, phenomenal AAA caliber games. And Castlevania games were usually, you know, close to top-tier games. Even a really bad Castlevania game is still better than a lot of other games out there. But I think Castlevania The Bloodletting might have been really cool. I definitely wanted to see that. This is the part where I'm sort of cheating a little bit. So this is really interesting. At the end of the Super Nintendo's life, Majesco was doing re-releases of video games, you know, especially ones that, you know, were a little less common and things like that, or or something like that. So they re-released Contra Hardcore on the Sega Genesis. They re-released Super Castlevania 4 on the Super Nintendo. You know, a lot of Konami games like that they were re-releasing, and they were basically $20 brand new. So you can get these games for $20. Remember when they first released? I walked up to my local KB Toys with some friends and picked up Super Castlevania 4. I think Contra Hardcore. Castlevania Bloodlines was one of them. I just walked out with a bunch of brand new, you know, re-release games. One of them they were supposed to do was Dracula X on the Super Nintendo, and unfortunately they were not able to do it. It was listed in Nintendo Power under their new release section or upcoming release sections for the longest time, and then one day it was just gone. And I reached out to Majesco directly back then. Actually, they actually answered their email, and they basically said that they couldn't get the license for it. They were planning on doing it, but couldn't get the license, and yeah, so I would have loved to have been able to get a re-release copy of that. At the time, I don't think I had even played the game yet. Actually, no, I did. Actually, what happened is I had managed to find a sealed copy in KB Toys in their bargain bin. It was like $25. It wasn't really a bargain, you know, because I could just go get some Jaguar games for like $10. That's a bargain. But I had never seen the game before, and I really wanted to play it, so I was able to get a copy of it. I ended up trading that to the guy that runs the Castlevania Dungeon website. And I think he runs Hardcore Gaming 101 as well. I traded it to him for some Master System games, which was an absolutely awful trade because those Master System games are worth nothing now, and Dracula X is like a $300 complete game. So had that been re-released, it wouldn't be as expensive as it is today. Like, it would probably still be expensive, but it wouldn't be $300 expensive, you know. Having those extra copies out in the wild would definitely, you know, appease demand a little bit more, and the game price would be lower. So it's a solid game. It's not my favorite Castlevania game, but I do enjoy it. And I would have liked to, you know, I would have liked that, holy crap, I can't talk right now. I definitely would have liked to have seen that be re-released, you know, for the reasons I stated. Another one is, Viewpoint for Sega Saturn. So we actually got Viewpoint on the Sony PlayStation, and you know, it's a really nice looking game, but it's sort of like glitchy. It's got a lot of like frame skipping when things get chaotic on screen. I would have much preferred slowdown, but it's got frame skipping, which is absolutely awful in a shoot 'em up. It requires like precision. Supposedly there was a Sega Saturn version in the works, and you know, the Sega Saturn back then in particular generally did 2D games better. You know, I think the Sega Saturn had more memory, more physical memory, so you know, it could push sprites around without breaking a sweat. It could push sprites around better without breaking a sweat, and so I would have liked to have seen that version of Viewpoint come to fruition. Like, I still wonder to myself whenever I play the PS1 version, like, would the Saturn version have been like the better playing game, and maybe it would be worth playing today. Like, the PlayStation version is not worth playing today. It's so choppy, it's got long load times, and again, it's a little glitchy. Like, sometimes you'll just get hit out of nowhere. You'll just die out of nowhere for no apparent reason. Sometimes you'll shoot enemies and like the collision detection won't work right and won't actually count as a hit when it's supposed to. It's really weird stuff. None of this happens in the arcade game, the Neo Geo original. And I'd absolutely have loved to have seen the Saturn version come out. So that's another one that I always think about as well in situations like these. There are other canceled games that I really wish came out. I'd have to really go back, you know, into my memory vault and to figure out what those are. But I know there've been a lot of games over the years that I wish came out that didn't. But yeah, those are probably, you know, the Castlevania the Bloodletting is definitely the one I wanted to see the most. Oh, Castlevania on the Dreamcast. There's going to be a Castlevania on the Dreamcast. From what I've heard, it actually wasn't looking very good, but, you know, as a big Castlevania fan, I obviously would have liked to have seen that come to fruition as well. So that's another one we can add to that list. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Those are all of the other questions I had. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, if you're a Patreon backer, feel free to toss me some questions over there. Or check out my new Discord server. So, discordapp.com or just discord.com, discord.com. And you know, you could sign up for that. If you link it to your Patreon account, you'll get access to it automatically. It'll just pop up on your Discord feed, and you can just ask me some questions there if you want. So if I can get questions rolling in on a somewhat constant basis, I'll be happy to keep pumping out these Q&A sessions. Hopefully they're fun for you guys. Hopefully you kind of get some insight as to, you know, what's going on in my head, and kind of what my thoughts are on games, the industry, and just whatever. So thank you, Andrew McNeil and Sharner Smith, for these questions. Again, these were questions that you know, I wasn't able to fit into the last one, so much appreciated. So this will go live on Patreon right away, and it'll probably go live on YouTube in a few weeks. I'll probably just let it sit there for a while, kind of like I did Q&A session number 2. So, but yeah, thanks for listening, guys. You know, thanks for all the support, and yeah, I guess until the next one, take it easy.